All right, last class we worked in section 3.3 and we talked about the conditional. What was the conditional? What does that mean? It's the if-then statements that we were working with. Right, good job. So today we're going to work more with if-then statements. So a conditional statement is a statement that has the form if-then. We talked about that. There are three other types of related statements to the conditional statement. The first is the converse. So let me first remind you what the notation looked like for a conditional statement. The notation that we used was a P and then an arrow and then a Q. Does everybody remember that? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, good. The converse, what it does is it actually flips the order around. So it does Q and then an arrow and then P. So it moves the second part of the statement to the beginning and moves the beginning part of the statement to the end, but the if stays at the beginning. Okay? So the if and the then don't move. It's just the individual component statements that switch places. The inverse also does something a little bit different. So instead of changing where the P and the Q are, it negates both of them. So it does an and then the arrow and then the negation of Q. Okay, so in some sense, that's sort of like the opposite of what it was. Just kind of like the first one we just did, converse, is sort of like the opposite of what it was. And then the last one's called a contrapositive. And what the contrapositive does is it does both of those things. It switches the order and it negates them both. So instead of having P, arrow, Q, we have tilde Q, and then the arrow, and then tilde P. Okay. All right, now each of these has some equivalences to another one. Each one of these has an equivalence to another one. So let me first do the original statement. The original statement, P, arrow, Q, this is equivalent to the statement tilde Q, arrow, tilde P. So a statement and its contrapositive are logically equivalent. And we're going to create some of these equivalences and talk about why that makes sense with some specific examples so you can actually see it and say, oh, I see. Yeah, I mean the same thing when I say that as I did if I said this. Okay? And then the other two, converses and inverses, also are equivalent to one another. So if you have Q, arrow, P, that is equivalent to tilde P, arrow, Q. Hang on, tilde Q. Get the tilde in there. Tilde Q. And if you look at those, you should also look at those two and say, well, they are contrapositives of one another as well. So if the first statement had been Q, arrow, P, and I was told to create a contrapositive for it, that is, switch the order and negate them both, it would become the other one that's listed there. So actually what the deal is that a statement is equivalent to its contrapositive. And the converses and inverses are contrapositives of one another. So we're going to do an example so we can start sort of seeing how this works, all right? Am I good to switch the slide? Okay. Oh, there's my chart for it. I already did it on I didn't remember I had it on a separate page. Okay. No, we already filled it in. We're just going to move on. All right. So our directions for this set, and these are listed in your notes too, say for each of the given statements, write the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And then it has this little conditional statement there that says, it may be necessary or helpful to write the statement in if-then form to start. So the first statement that we have is already written in if-then form. So that second sort of statement at the very end doesn't apply to this one. But this is a statement that says, if beauty were a minute, you'd be an hour. Wow, man, what a great pickup line, right? No. Don't say that to somebody. All right, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the statement and we're going to do the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. So let's take the original statement and let's underline the two pieces of information that are our component statements. So the first component statement is beauty were a minute, okay? Or beauty is a minute, or however you would have to reword it to make it actually, make sense in terms of our English language. And then the second statement is you'd be an hour, okay? So we're not going to work on this one so much about taking the language and making sense of it because it's going to sound funny no matter how we write this because it sounds funny anyway, right? But we're going to just work on the actual logistics of how we move things around. All right, so the first one we're going to do is converse. What do I do if I do the converse? What changes? the order, right? I'm just going to switch the order. I'm not going to put any nots in. I'm not going to negate anything. I'm just moving things around. So I still start with the word if, but what comes to the beginning instead? The you or an hour part. So we'll change some of the verb tenses to make it actually sound like English. It's still not going to sound like a reasonable statement, but it's going to sound like English when we rewrite it, okay? So if you were an hour, because I can't say if you'd be an hour. That's not English, at least not proper English, okay? So if you were an hour, and then I'm going to say then what? Then beauty would be a minute, or beauty is a minute, or something like this. Okay, so that's converse. Next one, inverse. What do I do for inverse? I negate it, but I leave them put, right? I don't move any orders around from the original statement. So from my original statement, everything is going to stay where it is. But what will I say at the beginning then? If what? Right, if beauty were not a minute or weren't a minute. Then what? Then you would not be an hour. So if you were an hour, you'd be an hour, then now you're not going to be. You would not be an hour. All right, our last one is the contrapositive. Okay, so what do I do for contrapositive? I do everything, right? I switch the order around and I negate them. So what's going to come after the word if on this one? If you were not an hour, then what? Then beauty would not be a minute. Okay, so I think every single one of those statements sounds funny, doesn't it? But they're logically written the right way now. I mean, we've got them written properly. So the next example, we'll be able to talk about how the equivalences make sense. Okay? So, are we ready for the next one? Okay. Milk contains calcium. What's the first sort of overarching problem? There's no if. So this is the example, I mean, the directions apply to this example where it says, it may be necessary to rewrite the statement in if-then form. And you had an example of this, example like this in your homework, in your group work that you guys did. You had one of them where it said something like, every picture tells a story. Do you guys remember that one? And I overheard many of you talking about how to rewrite that, and you were rewriting it properly. So you have the idea of how to rewrite this. How could I rewrite the statement, milk contains calcium, so that it starts out with if? How about it is, just so that we're not turning a person into milk? All right. Then it contains calcium. So is everybody okay with that one? Got to do that first. All right, converse. What would the converse be? All right, so we're going to move the calcium part to the beginning, right? So if it contains calcium, then it is milk. Now let's fill in the three different pieces we're doing here, and then we're going to go back and talk about them, okay? So let's just do the pieces first. How would I do the inverse for this? If it is not milk, then it does not contain calcium. All right, one more, contrapositive.
If it does not contain calcium, then it is not milk.
Okay, so all of those are written correctly. So let's talk about them and why it makes sense then to say that the first one and the third one are the first one, the original one, and the contrapositive are equivalents, and while the two in the middle are equivalents. Okay, so imagine you have a carton of milk and you look at the nutrition label on it. Okay, everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, on the side of the carton of milk, it will tell, and on the side of all products, food products, we have, in fact, we've got a milk carton right here. Yes, see Tyler's drinking some milk. And so there's a little nutrition label, and it says a number of different things, but one of the items that it will talk about on the side of those nutrition labels is calcium, right? And it will tell you how much calcium, what percentage of calcium and things like that are in a particular product. So if you're looking at something that is milk, chocolate milk, right, is what you're using there, Tyler, it will tell you how much calcium it has in it, and it does have calcium in it, correct? So if it is milk, it will have something filled in as a percentage on that calcium, part on the label. All right, so we're going to jump down here to the contrapositive. So now let's assume that you were given a nutrition label. You don't know what the product is. All you're given is the nutrition label. And you look at that nutrition label and you see where it says calcium, it says 0. Then do you know for sure it's not milk? Yeah, you know for sure it is not milk. I mean, you don't know what it is maybe, but you know it's not milk, because if it were milk, it would have something in that calcium category. Everybody make sense? All right. That's different than the inverse and the converse. So this converse right here says if it contains calcium, then it is milk. Can you give me an example of why that's not going to work? Orange juice. Has anybody ever heard of calcium fortified orange juice? They advertise it on television sometimes. What else? No one knows any other products besides orange juice that contain calcium. One a day. Vitamins, that's true. There are vitamins that will contain calcium, yep. How about yogurt and cheese? Ice cream, that's the reason we eat ice cream, of course, anyway, isn't it? Got to get our calcium in. Yeah, there's lots of things that do contain calcium that are not milk. So the second statement, this converse, that doesn't work. It is not equivalent to the first statement. The first statement would be a true statement if we were trying to evaluate the truth or the falseness of these claims. The second one would not. Same issue on the inverse right here. If it is not milk, then it does not contain calcium. Well, you guys came up with several different examples of things that are not milk and do contain calcium, right? So all of your examples actually fit in both of these categories for the converse and the inverse because they're equivalent statements to one another. Okay? We all good? Okay, we're going to do another one. This one just has symbols, though. So if you're just dealing with one that has symbols, and we're doing the converse first, what does the converse do to a statement? It switches the order. So what would come at the beginning of this particular one if the original statement was tilde P implies Q? Q implies tilde P. I just flip it around, right? How about the inverse? What would it look like? What would it look like? Good. So I take the original statement and I negate each part. So if I negate tilde P, that is just P, right? Right here. And if I negate Q, that's going to be tilde Q. Looks good? And then the last one is the contrapositive. tilde Q, arrow P. So I both want to switch it around and I want to negate both pieces. And if you've already done the ones above, you can pick one of those and switch something too, right? So I could just look back up at this line before for inverse and switch the order. And I would have this, right? Or I could look back up here at converse and I could just negate each piece and I could have this. So those are two other ways to sort of look at and think about creating the contrapositive. All right, I want to show you some common translations of this P arrow Q. Some of them we've talked about and others we haven't. So the first one that we've talked about is if a statement says if P, then Q. We've talked about that. That is one of our basic statements. And likewise, we've seen this one used where it says if P, Q, and it just leaves the word then out. It didn't really change anything. You know those are both the same statement, okay? You've heard me use the phrase P implies Q. You've seen some examples of the next one. All P are Q. That's very similar to my milk example. All milk contains calcium. That's in essence what that problem said. Or every picture tells a story. Something where it talks about all of the first thing implying something about the second item. You've seen that notation before. You've also seen this one. We did this last time where it had the if in the middle. And we said, but the if in the middle just moves to the front. So really this says if P then Q. It's just that it's written in backwards order. It's one of our funny things about the English language. We can do this and it works okay. The next three you haven't seen, all right? So the next three are something a little different. Two of them you'll never see. Not never, but it's very unlikely that you'll see them. But you need to know what they mean. So P is sufficient for Q. It means it's enough, whatever P is, it's enough. If that small thing, whatever that if beginning thing happens, then the rest of it's going to happen afterwards. It's sufficient. Okay? And this next one is very similar. Q is necessary for P. In essence, again, if this small thing, whatever P happens, it is necessary that Q will follow. It has to happen. It is necessary. The last one is the weirdest, and we will see it used. And it's the phrase only if. The phrase only if is not the same as the phrase if in the middle of a sentence. It's very awkward. Only if means that the if actually goes back to the beginning, and where only if is changed to the word then. We'll see an example. It's not, I don't think it's today. Let me see. Maybe it is. Yeah, it is. Example number 5. We're going to see an example of how this happens, and we can talk about why that makes sense. But the only if in the middle of a sentence, what it actually does is it moves the if to the beginning, where the P was, and that only if phrase changes to the phrase then. And that's an equivalent statement. All right, so we're going to write the following statements in if-then form. The first one is one you have seen one like it before. This one says all whole numbers are integers, which is a true statement, by the way. So how can I write this in if-then form? Awesome. And that's just the way we've been looking at the milk and calcium problem, right? Yeah. So if it is a whole number, then it is an integer. Is that one okay? Okay, let's do the only if example because it's a little awkward. All right, so we see the phrase only if in the middle. And for the moment, we're going to assume that I'm telling you the truth, and this is really how you change it, okay? So we're going to take the only if, we'll put the if at the beginning. So it's going to say if at the beginning, and all the order stays the same. So it's going to change this to say if the principal, and again, our English language has to be adjusted with the verb tense here. I'm not going to say will hire. If the principal hires more teachers, And then the only if is going to become the word then. Then the school board approves.
Will approve?
Either way, you could say will approve if you prefer. Probably makes it a little bit cleaner if I do, so we'll go with that. And the school board will approve. Okay, so on this one, what's happening here is it's saying that the principal, the first one where it says the principal will hire more teachers only if the school board approves. In other words, if this happens, if the principal does in fact go and hire those more teachers, then that is only because the school board approves. Right? So when we write this again, we're saying if the principal hires more teachers, then the school board did in fact approve that. He wouldn't have gone and done it if it hadn't been approved for him to do it. It's a little bit of an awkward one, so that just want to remember that when you see that phrase only if, it becomes an if then with nothing else moving around. We're not changing any orders or anything. Okay? All right, the last one is a little bit of an interesting one. It says the square of a two-digit number whose unit digit is 5 will end in 25. So now what? I'm supposed to put an if, so I can start with that, right? I can write the word if. It's going to be an if P then Q. What's going to be P? What goes at the beginning? If what? So what do we have here? What is my if though? What are my two statements? Let's do it that way. What are my two statements? What are the things that are going on? We've got a two-digit number whose units digit is 5. Okay, that's one of my statements. I've got this two-digit number, the units digit in 5. What is my other statement? That number ends in 25. Okay, is everybody with me? So you're thinking of numbers like 15 and 25 and 35 and 45 and 55 and 65, all of these two-digit numbers with the last digit 5. Okay? So that's the if part we're talking about. If the number is if the two-digit number ends in 5, we could say it like that. If we have a two-digit number whose unit digit is 5, something like that. So somebody tell me what you want me to write. If what?
If the square of two.
We don't have a square yet. The square part's about the ending in 25, which we'll get to in a minute. Right now, all we have is a two-digit number. So if
If it is a two-digit number, whose units digit is 5.
okay, so I'm going to put the value or the number so that if the value is a two-digit number with unit digit 5. Okay, so is everybody clear on what that says so far? I've got a number like 15. I've got a number like 85. I have a two-digit number whose unit digit is 5. Then what? Then the square, and I'm going to say again of that value just so that everybody's clear on what I mean. The square of that value, right, will end in 25. In other words, the last two digits now are not just 5 as the last digit, but you actually have the last two digits as 25 when you square the 95 or the 15 or the 65 or the 55 you started with. This one you actually have to dissect what it says before you can do anything, don't you? I mean, what's it really saying? What is it talking about? What are the two statements? Because it looks awkward. All right.